Welcome to Simulator Review, helping you find quality flight simulation with the world's most comprehensive listings and reviews of simulators. A warm welcome to episode 5 of our podcast for the flight simulation community. I'm Alexis, and I'm joined again by my two colleagues from simulatorreview.com, Elliott.
Hi there.
And Andrew.
Hello.
If you have listened to some of our previous episodes, thanks for returning. If you are new to our podcast, then hello and welcome. Have a listen to our previous episodes, and particularly 1 and 2, for an introduction and background on us and our website, simulatorreview.com. In this episode, our main discussion will be on the topic of can you fly a large jet aircraft in 30 minutes? So if you want to know the answer, or at least the opinion of 3 unbelievably attractive simulator enthusiasts with real-world flying experience, stick around. Before that, it's time for our regulator simulator news update covering both news at simulatorreview.com and in the wider community. And for this we go over to Elliott. So Elliott, what have you got for us this week?
Thanks, Alexis. So I thought this week we'd see what the Sims have been up to during the quiet period. And in the UK, it seems that a lot of the Sims are moving about and taking an opportunity to upgrade the hardware during this quiet period. So one of them, Jet Sim School in Peterborough that we visited, they've got a 737NG and would say an amazing cabin section and a very good flight deck as well. They're moving to a new location, and we've been invited to go and visit them once they've moved. Jet Sim Centre in Exeter, another 737 simulator, is also in the process of moving to new premises. And lastly, Flight Experience in London, that's 737NG. That's moving from Putney towards Heathrow and the Heathrow area. So that's going to be really good for the overall experience. We quite like it when simulator venues are airport located. It seems to enhance the overall experience. And secondly, any of you planning on going on holiday soon?
No.
No, not at the moment, sadly.
No.
That's a shame. Well, in case you were, I thought I'd look at some holiday locations to see what simulators are there, and you can plan your holiday around these. So anyone going to Rhodes? There's a generic jet simulator there, a company called Virtual Pilot. So you can leave your family or friends on the beach and go and fly a jet for a little while. Also Cyprus in Limassol, there's a 737NG sim, flight simulator Cyprus, check them out. Spain's a very popular destination for us Brits and the Germans as well. So Valencia, you've got a choice of an A320 or a 737 at FlySim. And slightly more upmarket in Marbella, Flight Experience have also got a 737NG. And they're part of the big global chain that you see all over the world, Flight Experience in China, Australia, etc. A little more exotic in the Bahamas, there's Jetline Simulation. There's another 737NG, and I've got dibs on going out and reviewing that one. And then there's quite a unique one in Tokyo, in Japan. So a bit of a different holiday, but the Haneda Excel Airport Hotel, check it out, have a look. You'll find it in our database on the website. They've got a 737 fixed base simulator in the room. So I can't imagine Alexis getting much sleep if you were staying there, could you?
I have seen that, and I was in Japan last year, and I didn't know about it. And I stayed near Haneda, and I only found out about it after I came home. And what I did some research on it, so it is, as you say, it's basically a normal hotel bedroom, then with, if you like, a 737 fixed base simulator in the bedroom. And it looks as good as some of the simulators we've seen in the UK. And it's more or less fully functional simulator. The sad thing is, I think when they leave you in your hotel bedroom at night, there's a big perspex screen, so you can't just spend your night flying around, unfortunately. So you have to book it with an instructor.
That's a shame. I could also imagine hygiene reasons as well. That's probably a good idea to screen it off for some in the evening.
Oh, the holiday ones sound quite interesting as well, Elliot. Do you think they're pitching for holidaymakers, or is it really for the local market?
The quality of the simulators looks very much on a par with a few of the simulators that we visited. Perhaps the one in Rhodes is a bit more of a generic jet, but at no point on any of their websites are they specifically advertising for holiday makers. It's more just if you're in the area, and these tend to be popular holiday destinations to a lot of these places. So should the weather not be as good or you run out of sun cream, then they're probably quite a good option to go and visit.
Right, well, thanks for the update this week, Elliott, and I'll look forward to some more sim news next time. This week's main topic is the discussion prompted about something which I think many of us have seen, which is videos on YouTube which ask, can you put someone with no flying experience or knowledge in a 737 or A320 simulator and get them to fly and land it? So I guess that prompts a discussion about what we think about this and what does it say more generally about flight simulators. And something I think we can also try and answer as well, thanks to Elliott and Andrew being real-world commercial pilots, is what are the differences between flying a real plane and some of the flight simulators that we've seen and reviewed. So, starting about what we think of the videos, Andrew, if I can turn to you first, I think you've seen some of these things. What do you think? What do you take from them? What do you think about them?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how people react to those environments. And in a simulator, of course, they're simulating obviously the physical hardware, the tactile, the stuff you're touching, the yoke and the thrust levers and the switches and so forth. And they're trying to represent the visuals as well in terms of how is your mind processing what it receives light sources through the eye and then how it's going to react to that environment. One of the things that they don't really recreate in that environment is the dynamism of the weather. Simulators can do a reasonable job, but the real world weather is a lot more dynamic and its impact on an aircraft's performance, for example, on approaches, takeoffs and landings, and also the ATC environment. It's very difficult to simulate, although with the VATSIM hookups that some of our venues are doing, that's going to change, I suspect. But an ATC, a busy ATC environment, say out of something like Heathrow, that is constant input into the audio tracks of the human, in addition to the visuals going on, and then the knowledge required to actually get the aircraft moving and so forth. It is, I remember going through training, it is a bit like information by hosepipe. It is a lot of stuff to take in for those with low experience buckets, being able to process that and deal with that, and there's little muscle memories and things to rely on. But in terms of the actual hand-eye coordination of taking off and landing a jet, yeah, I think simulators are really good on that part. And you need those things to obviously be able to take off and land. You need to know what that looks like and how that feels the best you can. But I tell you what, from experience going from learning the 7.3, from the very first real takeoff, when you got to do your touch and goes, that takeoff and landing is just so different to the simulator. It is, it's amazing how much it doesn't prepare you for that real world environment. And yet at the same time, you just do the same things you've been taught, the hand-eye coordination stuff, and it'll work. Al, I don't know how you found that process.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with everything you said. You come out of the simulator thinking you got it cracked and you're fairly proficient. But when you're actually sat there in the seat, real-world meteorological conditions, bumps on the runway, that smell of the aeroplane, got the training captain sitting next to you, and the view outside is actually real. Those extra stresses and factors, they hamper your capacity. So the tasks that you're very good at producing and recreating in the simulator, because you've got all the space, you're comfortable in there, you add these external factors and the ability to cope with that just shrinks, and you're very occupied with what's going on around you, even though you're performing the task very well.
That's interesting. So is there a great simulation of those things when you were in the simulator? There's so many of these things that you're mentioning. Are they just not really possible to simulate?
Well, for example, we're talking about weathers and the dynamics of the flight dynamic envelopes. So simulators are good at being able to put the rumbles into the hydraulics and things like that in terms of experiencing that. But a great example is as you're coming into some airports, particularly those around water, if you lack experience in dealing with those environments, you're probably not going to anticipate the change in energy and wind as you move from water to the road, to the grass, to the tarmac, and as that energy moves around. And particularly with loss of energy, if you on the larger aircraft, you get a lot more ground effect, so you know you're going to be cushioned by that. But I remember the 7.3, you had to really anticipate how it's going to deal with that energy management. I know as our Gatwick 08 rights, it could be a real shocker at times. As you move from green fields across the tarmac into different road surfaces, and particularly in summer, you get the energy coming off that is all very different.
That's exactly what I was going to jump in there with. The 320s, very susceptible to thermal activity, especially if you're in a very lightweight Airbus 319 in the summer. You'll be coming across, the example for me would be 9 left at Heathrow. You've got sink, rise, come over the tarmac, which is really hot. You get a rise. Effects from the terminal buildings. So we're very much concentrating there on the external weather factors and environment that the aircraft are in. That these things would be very difficult for a simulator to simulate for us.
And I think the other difference, as you say, is this kind of working in a multi-crew environment, which we don't often see, but we've seen with some of the simulators starting to do when they're doing virtual pilots club. So you're not expected to fly with an instructor, you're expected to fly with somebody else who is also a simulator enthusiast, who is also potentially at the same level as you, both learning to interact together, both learning to work together, not trying to do everything yourself, which is, I think, a common thing you see with people who've been at a home simulator, which is they're used to doing everything themselves, and they get in the simulator with somebody else, and clearly that isn't how it works.
So you reckon you've been in a simulator for about 1,000 hours, don't you, Alexis? If not more, that's a conservative estimate. Can you remember what your first time in the real flight simulator was like?
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple of very brief experiences, but then I did a couple. I really wanted to do more, so I did a couple of really long sessions, 2-3 hour sessions in the simulator, and we did a lot of stuff there, and it was just so bewildering. The amount of information you got presented to you that you're not familiar with, that you don't know how to read, you don't know where you're looking, you don't know. It was so much that I think after I left after 2 or 3 hours, I think my brain was completely fried, and I almost got into the car and couldn't remember how to drive for a few minutes. I had to sit there and kind of try and mentally reset to try and do something else. I think I was also lucky as well because most of my time is in a fixed base sim with flying with somebody else. So working kind of together with another crew member, trying to follow operating procedures and flows. That's all the stuff that we were doing, which is great. We had a lot of time in VATSIM as well. And in particular, one of the great things that if anybody does get a chance to do, which really adds in, is to do something like World Flight, which is an event every year where lots of simulators come in and join in, where it is incredibly busy on VATSIM. That to me really helps because you start getting those elements of having to do proper flight plans, working to a time, because if you fall behind on World Flight, you're not going to recover back, especially because we were in the 7.3, and you've got 7.4s out there that are going faster. You don't catch them up in the air. So you need to turn around the aircraft within 30, 40 minutes and get back on and get going. Being there, doing that at 3 o'clock in the morning, because it's a 24-hour, 7-day event, all those things start adding in, and that, to me, was really as close as a simulator enthusiast I could get to doing it real life. But then, as I say, there are still those massive differences. What do you think the main differences you found in terms of when you transitioned to real-world commercial flights compared to the simulator?
So the main difference of the real world commercial flying compared to popping out at the end of a simulator course is by the end of the sim sessions, you're an absolute hot shot with we'll talk about the 737, that was the first one. So you're an absolute hot shot with the failures, what systems are linked to what, thumbing your way through the QRH, you know exactly the pages to go to. So when I sat, my first flight was Gatwick to Marseille in a 737-500. So never flown a 500 before. We'd done our base training or our training on a 737-400. So that sapped the capacity to start with. Different display set up, and you weren't able to taxi. So a lot of the SOPs had varied. There's very much the sim is how we do things in the book, whereas the real world is mucking in a commercial operation and getting things done. So we took off. So you got all those external factors we talked about earlier. And first thing we noted was the absolute speed that things happen. First time I think I looked out the window, I was overhead Paris, heading down to the centre of France. So the speed at which things happen was absolutely incredible. It's just the multitude of things happening. The first time your brain has a moment to think is a lot further on. And the second big thing, again, coming out of the simulator where you're dealing with lots of failures and malfunctions, is I was wired in the flight just waiting for the master caution or the master warning to go off. It was a bit of a anticlimax that nothing happened in the flight, really. You're all primed and ready to deal with it. So it's very much easing into normal operations and how commercial flights are run, as opposed to the technical aspects of the aircraft.
The point about speed is interesting, and I think as a simulator enthusiast, the most enjoyable flights we did were usually the short sectors, especially something like Heathrow to Manchester, which you've only got 30 minutes flight time. It was almost like you were preparing for your descent and your approach as soon as you were in the air, because otherwise you get to that point where you get that feeling where you were behind the aircraft. You were trying to sort out the approach while you were already descending and working out programming, and that's not really where I think somebody who wants to do it properly wants to be.
Yeah, our phraseology for that is rushed approaches, where you feel that you're a lot behind the aircraft, and we can talk about coping mechanisms for that. But just to qualify exactly what you said, my most recent experience of the speed of a sector rather than an aircraft speed is coming off long haul and the 777 and coming back to flying the A320. My first sector was Heathrow to Paris Orly, and absolutely incredible. First time I actually had a moment to look out and think I could see the Eiffel Tower. So the speed of a sector is very relevant in terms of mental capacity.
That, I think, leads into a really good point as well, which is a difference, because Andrew, obviously you fly long haul at the moment, but what kind of things do you see that perhaps somebody who isn't a flight simulator wouldn't see at all?
Yeah, I think it applies to the short haul aspect too. Is certainly from our training, one thing I always thought when I look back was we didn't get exposure. Well, the first time you really got exposure to a normal day of airline flying was when you're in the real plane. What would have been really useful to a brand new airline pilot was, in the sim, we're going to run a normal few days of sectors simulated. These are the time you've got to leave. This is the time you brief. That would have been really useful, because you come out of the sim and they go, right, this is all the new stuff you've got to learn about how we actually run the day. Oh, right, I don't know any of that stuff. Oh, well, you've now got 10 minutes to learn it all. So in a simulator, if someone wants to gain experience in terms of what is it more like to be like an airline pilot, is run a simulated type day. Obviously, there's costs and time with that. But even just to run a normal sector, Heathrow to Manchester, briefing time, out to the aircraft, walk around, all that sort of stuff. Some you can simulate, some you can't. But there you get a lot more, you get a much better impression of the pressures, particularly for skippers and what our must deal with each day out of Heathrow, what they're having to deal with in keeping a commercial operation going at the right speed and with the right safety. In terms of long haul, you notice is what I was talking about there is just the speed of operations and having get things done. So again, the Heathrow Manchester example or the Orly example, if you're going to Heathrow to Hong Kong, well, you've got to deal with the prep, get the aircraft off the ground. And once you've got the aircraft off the ground, it's particularly, I notice a long haul operation, your life just becomes all that much easier, especially out of Heathrow. You can see the skippers relax a lot more. Once they're out of Heathrow, things just become nice and easy. Because, of course, in the normal day, very little goes wrong. Yeah, it's very unusual.
It is the phrase, isn't it? Gear up and relax.
Yeah, exactly. And you see that very much so. So the experienced guys know that. They know, right, you've got to be really focused. This is a good couple of hours being busy, getting the prep done, getting out of the aircraft and all of that. But again, in long haul, you're not, right, I've got the departure done, we're out of here, we're doing this, we're getting up to level, right, brief for the descent and the approach and all that. Right, it's, right, got to have a cup of coffee now. I've got to pick out what's on the meal. The heavy's gone back to have his rest. Start picking out some airports, start to think about diversions into. getting updates on weathers, where we're going to go, where we aren't going to go, checking on the flight levels, weather updates. You're not going to. You might start giving some thought to the arrival, about what might be expected. I often like to grab a weather update just to see what's going on there. Does that match to the brief I got a couple of hours ago? And then you sort of sit back and relax and just monitor the aircraft as it goes along. When it's all on, LNAV and VNAV at that point with autothrottle. It's much more relaxing. I've always thought too is, why don't we start brand new guys in long haul? It's a much easier introduction to airline world. Of course, they get 2 landings a month. Well, someone who's brand new can't do 2 landings a month because they'll be rubbish for ages. Well, they won't know they're rubbish or good for ages because they get so few, and hence you throw them into the deep end with short-haul flying. But I know some of the carriers do introduce their second officer programs. Those guys, is it KLM does it? I know Air New Zealand does it. The straight in as a 2-striper or single stripe, depending where you are on that, straight into long haul, which must be a really nice way to be introduced to airline flying. Other companies, you're straight in right seat short haul. Oh yeah, it's a busy time.
Yeah, but I guess the difficulty is that for airlines which don't have a short haul operation, so obviously they're forced to do that, or even if there's a choice, the difficulty, as you say, is that at that stage you need to be practicing your landings, and if you're not doing many of them, how much are you learning sitting in a flight deck for 10 hours going to Hong Kong?
Well, I think Air New Zealand model, if I've got this right, so I might be corrected, and if you're a listener out there, both of you, please let us know if I've got this a bit wrong. But is that the guys come in as 2-stripers into their long-haul fleet. Their takeoff and landings, of course, that they need are simulated. So the guys get into the technicalities of taking off and landing, which is really important. But they're slowly introduced to long-haul operations. So say it's the 3 or 4 man crew. Okay, they go and do the walk around. They're helping out getting the cabin sorted. They're sorting out the bunks and that stuff. It's funny, you come from short haul, so after about 5 years, depending on your carriers, into long haul, you don't know anything about bunk beds and number of pillows required or any of that stuff because you've never seen one. Whereas the guys and the other carriers who have done that stuff, they know all about the airline operations. They know how it all functions. They know how the company paperwork's generated. They know all that. They know how leave works. I don't know how to leave work for months. You just because you're so busy on the flying bit. Whereas if guys come into long haul, once they get to the right seat of a first officer's short haul aircraft, all they've really got to worry about now is just the flying bit. Because they've been exposed to so much. And in long haul, you get exposed to all sorts of different environments, as opposed to, say, short haul around Europe it's got a lot of differences, but it's relatively uniform in terms of the types of airports and that type of thing. Al can probably comment on that a bit better than I can with the left seat experience.
Yeah, I'll vote for Andrew for Director of Flight Operations. You get my vote.
Great, might need that shortly.
Alexis, is there anything that you've heard then from what Andrew and I have said that you think simulators could try and incorporate to make them a little bit more realistic to the real world flying? Because that's what we're here about at Simulator Review. We're trying to make it as authentic and as realistic as possible, and that's what we're seeking from our simulators.
Yeah, and I think it's important because we can identify what a real world, as a group, and especially with Andrew and Elliott, identify what a real world experience of flying an aircraft is like. I go back to what we've talked about before, which is if you start adding in things like multi-crew, which we talked about, I think, in the last episode with Ascent Aviation with their new Virtual Pilots Club. If you do things like add in VATSIM, if you do things like do events like World Flight, which JetSim's school in Peterborough do every year as a group, having been part of groups like that before, I can't even begin to tell you what a great experience it is, because you are doing things where there are rosters, you are supposed to turn up at certain times, you're supposed to get your flight plan beforehand, you're supposed to have a look through it, look at what the weather is like, what approaches you think you might be doing, have a look at the charts. Can you remember how to do an RNAV approach? If you're not, perhaps best time to look at it up before you turn up on the day. Who are you flying with? How much do you hate them? Do you think you can suffer with them in the cockpit for 2 hours? It's all those things, and then when you're getting in, you're under a time pressure of you've got to turn the aircraft around quickly, you've got to keep moving to try and keep on schedule. If you don't get out quickly, you're going to be in a queue of 40 people trying to get your your departure clearance before you can even get going, or be in a queue at the runway. It is really as close as you can get, and I think the more that simulators start to put those elements in, they really start to push forward with the realism compared to moving and doing the 30-minute flight experience. Little Johnny has a bit of a flying around, does a few landings, a few takeoffs, isn't that great? So I think more of them are doing that, but it would be great if I think those that really want to push on and push that forward do more of that, because I think that really helps.
And this is something we discuss with the venues when we go out and visit, and when we talk to the owners and managers and the instructors. This is the sort of operation that we try and tell them about and push and just strive for realism when we're asking what they provide and what the simulator does. So these are all very relevant aspects that we believe in at Simulator Review.
And I think that's why it's so critical that when we do our reviews, it isn't just about the main things or the obvious things like flight controls. It's about all the other aspects around that. Do you have some kind of virtual pilots club? Do you have VATSIM? Do you have some kind of loyalty scheme where people can come back and have a virtual type rating or something like that, where they can learn and be more immersed in how the aircraft flies and fly with other people in the multi-crew environment? And that's really why we're emphasising those things and asking about those things, because I think we can identify those things are the things that really provide that extra realism and extra immersion factor over and above just a standard simulator.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because one of the things we cover are the quality of the instructors. We particularly like that experience of airline pilots, either current or retired, because they can bring something to a simulator environment that with that experience it's very hard to replicate in any meaningful manner, because the instructor has no idea about it. We do like the packages too, where they're offering sort of course bundles, a number of hours you pay for it discount, because then you can really sort of build up into doing a little course, into doing a day, a proper return sector, Heathrow, Manchester and back, and particularly those turnarounds on short haul. I mean, that's where, the guys are really earning their money. And that's where experience really comes through. Guys who can turn around a 320 or 73 and, 10, 15 minutes, have it all set up and be ready to go, and then go for a cup of tea. I mean, that's what airlines are paying for, these guys who can get all that done, lots of capacity, and then they can deal with the bits and pieces and the passenger issues and the technical issues that do arise from day to day.
Thanks to Andrew and Elliott for a very interesting discussion. We'll have more episodes covering using simulators in the future, so keep an eye out for that. So, there you go. An interesting chat about the first time being in a flight simulator and what the real differences are between flight simulators and the real thing. What do you think? What was your first visit to a large jet simulator like? Were you overwhelmed, or did it feel completely instinctive? And if you have a bit of simulator experience, or even are a commercial pilot, what do you think the main differences are between the simulator and the real thing? We'd love to hear your thoughts. In our next episode, we'll start having a look at another of the simulator venues which we visited, and which now has a blue pin featured review in our database, specifically Delta 5 in Sao Paulo in Brazil. We'll be going into the background of our review and some discussion of our thoughts on the venue, so I hope you'll join us again for that. In the meantime, please do subscribe to our podcast. For now, though, it's goodbye from me, and goodbye from Andrew.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from Elliott.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Simulator Review podcast. We would love your feedback, so please do comment and rate us. Please follow, share, like and subscribe on all our social media channels, where you can see regular updates on new simulator listings and reviews, as well as our latest articles. Until next time, happy simming.